This is step number 3, which is the most difficult. So bear with me because I go over general stuff on this particular page, but I get into much more detail as I move forward. So bear with me here. Identifying all dependencies. This is where stuff goes much more detailed. We're going to use a dependency diagram. Literally all it is arrows. So again, you know I'm dyslexic here. I want you to almost think of it backwards, that all of these items that have arrows are dependent on the items that frankly don't. So think of it coming from project num and employee num, and then it affects project name, employee name, job class. That's the current setup that we have right now. And by the way, there's a couple of different dependencies that we're already worried about that we are going to talk about in great detail here in a moment. Dependent. The word dependent means that a value is determined by an attribute, usually by a key. Now remember, that could be a composite key, not just one value, but a composite key. A partial dependency means that a functional dependence would determine it only by the part of the primary key. That one's actually pretty straightforward, so go figure. Items that need to require an update, insertion, or deletion will need to have those items, the primary key, in order to complete the transaction. That one's actually pretty straightforward. It's a transitive one that's a little bit more interesting, and then there's some other ones too. But anyway, so that attribute is dependent on another attribute that is not a part of the primary key. And I'm going to go over these two very specifically here in a moment. I hope that you can already tell that that's bad news. And we are going to fix that. Yes, it's going to require another table. So now let me get into the specifics, and you're going to again see a before and after, and hopefully I'll be able to really kind of solidify these thoughts for our last step in identifying dependencies. Primary dependency was the first one that we needed to do, and we kind of figured that one out already. Again, notice I did not try to add an extra attribute to the table. I just used what I was already given, that between using this set of keys, a combination set of keys or a composite set of keys, I'm able to uniquely identify all the different attributes in this particular table so far. So that part was already done by a discussion that you and I had. Now we get into the partial dependencies. Partial dependency is just that. Let me give you an example. Is that a project name is going to be dependent on the project number. And that actually should make a decent amount of sense. So when you're given the project number, you should be able to determine the project name, or vice versa, meaning project name is dependent on the project number. That should make a decent amount of sense. For employee, for the employee number, it should be able to identify the employee name, job class, and their number of how much they're charging per hour for that particular job. Okay? So that, hey, that makes about sense, right? I should be able to identify that part of this. Now, that sounds weird here. Notice I've got two partial dependencies. Could they be separated? Okay. So if I'm given an employee number, you should be able to identify all the rest of them. So that means that these three items are dependent on employee number, which makes sense. Yeah, okay. Transitive is the more interesting one. On this one, we have job class and then how much are they charging per hour. These two are kind of dependent on one another, meaning if one changes, the other one needs to change. If the job class changes in this particular application, then how much they're charging per hour will also change. So one really depends solely on the other one, and it's not by chance. It's a one-to-one relationship on this. So job class determines how much the change hour is going to be, or charge per hour for this particular application. So that is a transitive one. Again, notice how I'm already, I don't want to say segmenting, but that's for a better choice of words, I'm okay with that. we're starting to identify maybe some items that really should be on their own table. You're going to see that come up shortly. But I'm not done yet, if you can believe that. So now we bring it all back together on identifying all our dependencies. So here's the before, here's going to be the after. The code really doesn't, I shouldn't say code, the data doesn't change much yet. Here's the original picture of showing everything back together again with the transitive, partials, and the overall primary key. This is called a relational schema. And yes, it is all text. You can do the arrow thing on your keyboard, just doing the dash and the greater than sign. That's just fine. But this is called the relational schema, meaning that we've really put our relationships into text. And that can actually help us in the long run for a lot of different things when it comes to identifying what our overall first normal form is going to be for the table, getting rid of some redundancies, which we've done already. We've found some partial dependencies and some transitive dependencies. Now, by the way, you might have a table that doesn't have any transitive ones in there. That's just fine, but I would still list it so that we know that you at least looked at it. Does that make sense? This is going to help us out, if you can believe this, into our next form, which will be our second normal form, because these two things are bad. These are bad. We will end up doing something with them, and I think you already know what I'm about to do. But this overall listing helps me formulate what your thoughts were from translating from first normal form to now into second normal form. So think of this as literally proving your answer in a mathematical problem when you're trying to do all the work to show how you got from the start to an answer. This is part of it. So that relational schema is really important that you do have. And I believe one of your questions that is coming up here does ask you to do this. That's the form you should look at. Let's put it that way. By the way, you'll notice the underlines are for the composite keys that we're looking for. So overall, there shouldn't be a lot of craziness in here. And again, it just reflects the different relationships that we have. So for transitive dependency, you'll see job class. Notice that's pointing to change hour. Same exact idea that we have here. No real craziness to that. But we're not done yet. Here's your exercise. I am throwing a completely new data set to you. Again, I need you to dig into this and see what the heck this thing is doing so that you can understand the overall process, the business process, the data collection process, and what the damn thing is trying to do. Seriously, read it over. For the invoice table, that's what this must have been called, I want you to draw the dependency diagram. You can do it hand-drawn. Just make sure it's nice looking. You identify all the dependencies, including partial, transitive, and keys, too. Keys should be there as well. I'll update that here in a second. And then when you're done with all of that, I want you to write the relational schema that we just went over on the previous page. It should look set up the same. It's not going to look the same. That's for darn sure. It's a totally different table. That's the three things I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to add key to this here in a second, and away we go. Get to work. Same table from before, the previous exercise. Same table, no changes. You're going to use that relational schema that you built and now remove all the partial dependencies by creating, you should know what, writing new relational schema once we're done with that. So that's the interesting part that I didn't show you in the previous example just a minute ago. And then you're going to draw its dependency diagram. And again, you're going to do that hand draw nicely, please, so I can see it exactly if you're doing it correctly. So now again, Exercise the same table, but now we're breaking that up into smaller portions, getting rid of the partials. So get to work.